Bueno, should we start?
Yes. That's a good question.
I didn't expect it.
An excellent question. Hi,
Hi.
Danielsen. Very nice to meet you.
How are you? Hello. How are you? So, hello. Good morning. Thanks for your attention and welcome to this room. I will talk about the room a little bit later. So, let's just stop here and welcome to this conference that has been called Rector's Conference, a name that undeserved, I would say. But anyway, a name. So we start according to the program that we have made here, and then first David Kennedy will speak something that is titled here, Introduction. So David, please. You can sit, stand, wherever I know that you
I'm
like.
a walk around kind of guy.
So
Yeah, no, I think I can manage to stay here. So good morning. Good morning, Rector Andradas. It's great to be here. It's been a particularly thrilling week for me, partly because it brings to a culmination a long relationship between Harvard University and Complutense. So we've had a partnership with Complutense University at Harvard for 25 years now, and have been working together in a variety of different ways. We've assisted between the two universities scores of students and visiting scholars from Spain in the United States. It's been an incredibly productive exchange, not only of people, but also of ideas and research. And so it was thrilling when we had the opportunity to begin this week a new venture in partnership with Santander Universities, a venture between the Institute for Global Law and Policy at Harvard, which I direct, and the Institute for Center for International Research and Exchange here at Complutense. The purpose of the venture, for which this Rector's Conference is a culminating event, is to strengthen university teaching and university research on a global basis by helping younger scholars who have interesting new ideas and interesting new ways of approaching global problems and global issues have relations with one another. So the idea is not that we at Complutense or we at Harvard have all the answers to global issues. The idea is all of you have the answers, and through interaction with one another and through mentoring by faculty from lots of different universities, we can come to advance the field of knowledge about what's going on in the world and what we might be able to do about it. So we've had 120 people here, and I think we have 120 people here with us all week, both faculty from Complutense, faculty from Harvard, but also faculty, more importantly, from lots of universities around the world, who have taken the time to mentor one another in a variety of different ways. So the basic idea behind the initiative is that global issues, which is what we're going to talk about today, can't be understood anymore by one university or by a particular department. So one institute, whether at Complutense or at Harvard, isn't going to be able to figure out how to think about global issues. We need to do that together in some networked way. And so when the event is over and 120 people who've been with us this week go on with their work, the hope is that they'll stay in touch with each other, find ways to collaborate, continue the conversations that you've had, come back and see us both here at Complutense but also at Harvard, and stay engaged in trying to figure out answers to the problems that you all and they all brought with them. But I think there's a larger issue at stake, which I wanted to talk about in the context of the Rector's invitation to have an event about global issues, which is, what ought the role of great universities be in understanding and thinking about global issues? So great universities have beautiful campuses. Here's one. We have all these people working on lots of different problems. What are we doing collectively to contribute to solving the profound political, economic, social, human challenges that have been facing not just Spain and the United States, but the global world, really, in the last years? And one of the things, there's a word in English that's a very new, faddish word, thought leadership. So are we, as universities, providing thought leadership on these issues in some way? Are those of us who have the opportunity to speak out finding ways to turn our research that we're doing with one another into interventions in public debates, interventions in an activist way? Are we helping our societies beyond the teaching and the research that we're doing to understand what the possibilities are? And so what I thought we'd do this morning is look at, so do an inventory of global issues as they appear to scholars who are working at the frontiers of global thought, if we could imagine there being such a thing. And we've had a number of them with us over the past week. If we want to take a look globally at issues and be a thought leader as a great university, it's not simply a set of legal or institutional issues. That's where my particular focus is. It's not a exclusively economic set of issues or political issues or cultural and social issues. One needs to find a way of bringing a conversation among those different fields together. And so I thought what we do is take a sample to get the conversation started of 4 scholars who are, I think, working at the cutting edge of thinking about these matters, who come at questions at a global level from very different perspectives. So we'll hear from Sheila Jasanoff first, who's a professor and colleague of mine at Harvard University, where she specializes in science and technology studies. She also has a background in law. And it makes sense to start, I think, with Professor Jasanoff because we focus so much on institutions and politics and so on, but meanwhile there's science and technology that's changing so many things. Or is it changing things? And how do we understand those changes? And how ought we to be taking questions relating to science and technology into account? And then I thought we'd think about the global economy or the global political economy from 2 different perspectives. First, Dan Danielsen from Northeastern University, who thinks about the global political and economic life from an institutional point of view and a legal point of view, the structure of corporations and the structure of global value chains, and how are the institutional nitty-gritty relationships that hold the political economy together understood. And we'll also have Rafael Miro at the end, who's an economist here at Complutense, helping us with the big picture of the global economy and also the European economy and how they fit together. So kind of institutional angle and a corporate, an economics angle. And in between, Karen Engel from the University of Texas is a professor of law and also directs a center on human rights and social justice issues. And I'm hoping that she'll give us some sense of how global issues look from the perspective of social justice questions, from the human perspective, which is basically at the foundation of everything that we ought to be thinking about when we're thinking about economy, political economy, and science and technology. So that's the idea. What I've asked them to do is give us a report from the front. You are at the cutting edge. What's going on at the cutting edge? How do you see global issues? They'll each speak for 5 or 6 minutes, and we'll have the chance for some general conversations. So thanks very much. Sheila, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, thanks, David, for that introduction. Is this mic working okay? Can everybody hear? Great, thank you. So good morning. It's a pleasure and an honor to speak about the work of the Institute for Global Law and Politics in a somewhat programmatic way to all of you who are very much on the front lines in this shared enterprise of ours. The name of the Institute stresses an important idea about the law that's obvious as soon as we begin thinking about it, and yet it's often disregarded in traditional legal education, that law is global in scope. There's nowhere one can go on this planet without encountering the hand of the law, and much of our group's work relates to the ways in which the force of law makes itself felt across our world, whether we're speaking, as my colleagues will do, of financial systems, labor and corporate governance, human rights, or the environment. Much of the work that all of you are doing is helping to illuminate how law makes and shapes the global structures that govern our lives. The word global appeared already quite a number of times in David's introduction. Whether or not we're actively aware of these workings underneath the surface, law has scaled up our experience as human subjects from local to global, and a great deal of the resistance we see around the world today, resistance that this group's work is helping us to understand better, has to do with that very aspect of law's work, namely making things global. But another dimension of our group's work is just as significant in changing the scale of human experience, and this is law's engagement in shaping our understandings of time along with space. How does time matter? How does past relate to present? Which pasts and which futures are we responsible for? And how is that responsibility going to make itself felt? This dimension of law work, which we can think about as making time, is most apparent in our group's engagement with science and technology, especially at the frontiers of innovation. It's no exaggeration to say that the kinds of people we will be in the future, indeed the kinds of societies we will be part of, will be determined at the intersections of law, science, and technology. Part of what makes our group's collective enterprise unique and uniquely relevant to the human condition is the exploration of law work at the leading edges of knowledge and of technology. Examples of the sorts of issues that arise in our work are everywhere. Since coming to Spain, each time I do a Google search, I find a pop-up message on my screen that I never see in America, a privacy reminder from Google. To be consistent with data protection laws, we're asking that you take a moment to review key points of our privacy policy, which covers all Google services and describes how we use data and what options you have. We'll need you to do this today. If you click where they want you to click, you get a quite frightening set of reminders about all the ways that Google is processing and combining the data that we all generate in such profusion, almost unthinkingly, every single day. No wonder these search engines have been called data oligarchs. They accumulate and store up and make new predictive algorithms out of discarded bits of thought and action that no history would have recorded or remembered even a decade ago. Google is now our most efficient historian of the Annal school, the keeper of our Alltagsgeschichte, the instrument, along with Amazon and Facebook, Twitter and Tumblr, Reddit and Pinterest, that has turned us all into a new kind of governable being, the data subject. But just seeing this reminder also tells those of us who are not Europeans something else. The very category of data subject is one that has evolved under European law. It does not have the same legal meaning or resonance once we cross an ocean and find ourselves in a different territorial space, like the United States. This little pop-up message is a daily reminder that we live in interesting times in more ways than one. Our very mortality is being rethought and remade in curious ways at the interface of technology and law. In Spain, Google has had to trim its capacity to take our pasts and project our futures because a person who preferred to remain anonymous, at least with respect to his bygone debts, won a judgment that carries a right to be forgotten. Challenges are cropping up everywhere now to technology's right to remember who we are into the far distant future beyond the limits that we ourselves, planted here and now, consider appropriate. But the languages in which people are objecting and the kinds of results that the law is handing down vary, showing how different we still remain in understanding how our fleeting present sits between our pasts and our futures. And information technology is not the only site where such questions of existence, pasts, and futures are playing out. In America, a long-dead African-American woman's descendants recently gained the right to be involved in all future decisions involving biomedical research with cells taken from her body. That case may be sui generis, but the problem of what happens with biological materials and information taken from our bodies is much more general, and it's an area where global norms are far from being as yet firmly in place. So in our work on law, science, and technology, we're helping to uncover the different foundational commitments that are pushing research, development, and innovation policies throughout the world. Through that inquiry, we're exposing often tacit understandings of some of the most basic questions of metaphysics and moral philosophy. What is life as contemporary societies imagine it? What is the nature of the human, and what entitlements belong to human nature? And what responsibilities do our governing institutions, in particular those of democracy and the state, have to implementing those responsibilities? I see the work of IGLP, especially together with other equally engaged intellectual partners, such as Complutense University, as part of humanity's ongoing quest for alternative futures of greater promise and equality, and this is what makes me pleased and proud to be working in this community. Thank you again to our Complutense hosts for making it possible for me to be here today.
Thank you. Is that better? Okay. So I thought I would tell a story somewhat about the evolution of my own thinking in relationship to my field of corporate law, in particular corporate power and its impact on global governance and development, as a way of sort of articulating where I see the moving horizon of the field and important next questions that we should be focusing on in the field. So for the last 40 years or more, corporate law has been primarily focused on two problems. One is the internal governance, the relations between shareholders and managers in individual firms. And the other is the impact of those arrangements on the distribution of capital in capital markets. And that same set of preoccupations has been replicated at the global level. So we look for best practice norms that can be transnationalized to set up optimal relations between managers and shareholders in order to optimize distribution of global capital. Now, I felt that this particular combination of foci was actually impoverished to the extent that it was unable to deal with two really fundamental things. One was the complex role that corporations as institutions were playing in our world. In the shaping of work, in the shaping of family, in the shaping of the social, in the shaping of political, in the way in which we understand collective activity. And that these social dimensions were not unlike the kinds of social dimensions produced by public order like the state, but were dramatically under-theorized, and that corporate law was completely not looking at all at these questions. The second was that corporate law, with its focus on the individual firm and individual relations between shareholders and managers, wasn't looking at the complex relationships between firms and states that seemed to be changing the global political economy. the ways in which firms were impacting regulation, the ways in which business activity was defining social welfare in lots of parts of the world, the ways in which one might begin to see regulation as not a public effort to control a private and autonomous actor, but rather a co-production of firms and states in some complex negotiation of power. Now, the global economic crisis got me to thinking about a couple of other big questions beyond those ones I just raised, which was essentially, how did it turn out that the domestic rules of a few individual nation states were able to not only shape the global economy, but also to ultimately topple it? Things like the domestic mortgage rules or housing policy of the United States, or Delaware corporate law, or bank secrecy rules. And so this led me to think about, what is the role of firms in transnationalizing legal rules? It wasn't that the United States imposed its mortgage rules or its effort to try and promote home ownership among lower income people in a sovereign assertion of power. That globalization of the impact of those domestic choices happened through business practices. And so really trying to get a better understanding of how those business practices transnationalized rules, and what sorts of rules, in a certain sense, one might imagine not all rules are equal. While nation states might be equally sovereign, not all rules are equal in the global economy. And so that made me feel that what we really needed to understand was we needed a better map, both of these capital flows and legal flows. So that led me to look in an interdisciplinary direction, which was to an emerging set of scholarship coming out of critical geography, economic sociology, political economy, around tracking a ubiquitous form of organization of production globally called global value chains. Long chains of interconnected firms, not in the old sense of multinational firms in which you have a big parent who owns a whole bunch of global subsidiaries, but rather really widely dispersed sets of intermediary firms, mainly coordinated and connected to each other through contracts. And that one of the things that was interesting about this literature is it seemed to me, wow, this gave us an opportunity as lawyers to begin to map these flows, not just in terms of how money moves or how production moves, but also maybe how these legal rules are being transnationalized. But the problem was that this interdisciplinary innovation of global value chains had no account of law. It really generally thought about this disaggregation of production amongst infinite numbers of firms, sometimes thousands of interconnected firms, was actually the result primarily of economic efficiency. It was the most efficient mode. But if we think about traditional conceptions of firm theory and coordination, one would imagine that having all these intermediary firms would produce enormous transaction costs, in that you'd have to negotiate all sorts of contracts, and those negotiations were going to be complicated, expensive, but also lots of agency costs, in the sense that being able to steer 1,000 different separate intermediaries through contractual relations that would need to be enforced in multiple contexts was actually going to produce very high agency costs and potential risks, the very kinds of risks that corporate governance had been focused on historically with respect to whether managers would act in the best interest of shareholders. So that led to an interdisciplinary project that emerged out of the IGLP, involving both lawyers and some of these critical geographers and political economists and economic sociologists. And it turned into a working group called the Role of Law in Structures of Production. And what we were trying to understand was, it could be, if you think about these distributed organizations of firms, it might be that they were efficient, but if you thought about regimes like tax, or you thought about regimes like intellectual property, or you thought about regimes like tort law or corporate liability, you might imagine that these organizations were actually being shaped by legal rules that had very little to do with efficiency. For example, in order to minimize tax, you might need to locate value in one place, money in another place, liability in yet another place, and that if we had better understandings of the legal levers that were producing these production structures, we might have a larger capacity both at the policy level and in the global governance level for getting greater accountability across these firms. And in particular, the tragedy in Bangladesh, the Rana Plaza factory collapse, where 1,100 people were killed in a single industrial incident, and the responses to that collapse led all of us as a group to think that it wasn't just important at a matter of theory, but it was actually significantly important in thinking if we were trying to figure out how to get better social welfare outcomes for workers in Bangladesh, how might we use different legal regimes to produce that result. And if we were thinking about what sorts of opportunities there were for people in developing countries to get more benefit out of the global economy, how might we use legal regimes to shift power in ways that enabled them to bargain for a larger percentage of the global surplus? And so this particular project resulted in a manifesto. We called it the Law and Global Value Chains, a research manifesto, articulating a broad range of research questions which we're only at the frontiers of beginning to understand. But what was interesting about this long trajectory is that I felt that, in fact, looking at global value chains, the ways in which law is disaggregated, jurisdictions are sliced and diced, different rules get transnationalized regardless of assertions of sovereign power, both gave us a new window on understanding global political economy, but also brought us back to the origins of corporate law in its early instantiations in the early 20th century, which was, I'm just finishing, which were two questions. One was how to preserve the extraordinary productive power of the corporation without allowing the corporation to overwhelm either our political institutions or to capture so much of the surplus as to reduce total global welfare. So a focus on corporate power and the relationship between firms and on the relationship between the firm and the state. And I think fundamentally that's where we need to wind up. We need to come back to some of those earlier big questions in order to better understand how to manage the productive benefits of the corporation for better social outcomes.
Great, thank you, Dan. One of the things that's interesting about both Professor Danielsen and Professor Jasanoff's descriptions of what they're finding and what they're doing at the frontiers of thought is that they both are part of projects that grew out of the IGLP workshop. So for all of you who've been here this week, one of the things that I hope you'll be doing with your colleagues and friends and all your new best buddies is thinking, all right, if I thought of the work I'm doing together as a multi-year project, the way Dan has thought about his work in the corporate field with a number of colleagues, the way Sheila has thought about her work, in STS with a number of our scholars, how could you, over the next 4 or 5 years, change the nature of your field by working together in that sort of way? So these have been interesting group projects that had their home in what started at a workshop just like this one.
Buenos dias. Good morning. Many thanks to Rector Andradas for the invitation to be here at Complutense. It's a real honor. I've been asked to speak about all issues of social justice and human rights, which is obviously too tall of an order. But it's fortunate that I'm not the only one speaking about social justice on this panel. As you've already seen, that's what motivates, or heard, motivates much, if not all of the work of other panelists as well. I believe very strongly that human rights cannot be the only basket in which we put our social justice hopes. If we do, it will simply function as an adjunct to business as usual, aiming only to alleviate some of the most overt forms of violence that are seen as excessive to our current way of doing politics and business. When we have that conception of human rights and of justice, human rights becomes, as David Kennedy has put it for some time, potentially part of the problem. Those of us who work in the human rights field need to be critical of the frames it occupies and the types of violence it backgrounds as well, even while foreshadowing others. And we need to ally ourselves strategically with those who share a transformative vision of the world and are aiming to effectuate it in law, politics, and economics in areas ranging from labor relations and climate change to international investment and finance. And that's why I like IGLP. So I'm going to say a few words about some of the difficulties I identify in human rights law and discourse today, many of which also have been developed with other people involved with IGLP, and then suggest some ways that we might think about them differently. I'm particularly concerned about the carceral turn that the human rights movement has taken since the beginning of the 21st century, with anti-impunity as its primary rallying cry. Essentially, to support human rights today often means to favor criminal accountability for those individuals who have violated international human rights or humanitarian law. Fighting impunity has become central to human rights law and discourse, as has the increase in numbers of international criminal institutions, but also a turn to criminal law at a domestic level. So that the increase in international institutions occur alongside a near consensus among judicial and quasi-judicial human rights bodies, international and regional human rights institutions, and international human rights scholars and advocates that states themselves have a duty to investigate, prosecute, and punish individuals, and occasionally groups, who commit what they consider to be serious human rights violations. Now, that consensus is often seen to be a clear success for the human rights movement, maybe even one of the best examples of its successes. But I contend that this assumption has problematically affected the lens through which the human rights movement and international legal scholars who support it view human rights violations. In short, as advocates increasingly turn to criminal law to respond to issues ranging from crimes against humanity to economic injustice, they reinforce an individualized and decontextualized understanding of the harms they aim to address. And they end up, often paradoxically, relying on the state and forms of criminalization of which they have long been critical. So let me offer, by way of example, a case that I've discussed with some of you this week in our stream on human rights, international law, and violence. And that's the case of Berta Cáceres, an indigenous Lencan Honduran activist who had led her community in opposition to the building of a series of dams that affected their territory. Now, the Honduran state had granted concessions to a local firm to build these dams with the support of a Chinese company, Sinohydro, the International Finance Corporation, which is the World Bank's private sector arm, the Dutch Development Bank, the Finnish Fund for Industrial Cooperation, some German companies, and many others. And after a series of protests, including roadblocks that slowed the project, Sino Hydro and the World Bank pulled out, which seemed to have been a success. But Berta and her movement continued to call on others to do so as well as something much more transformative. Now, in the past 5 years, not coincidentally since a 2009 coup in Honduras that overthrew a socialist president and installed one who made clear that Honduras was open for business, over 100 environmental defenders, as they are often called, have been killed in Honduras. And on March 3rd of this past year, Berta Cáceres became one of them, when she was murdered in her home. Now, Berta was better known internationally than many of these others. She had received a number of prizes, especially including in the United States, and she had also gotten the Inter-American Commission to issue precautionary measures on her behalf. So when she was killed, human rights NGOs and intergovernmental organizations like the Inter-American Commission immediately condemned her death and primarily called for perpetrators to be called to justice. And they did so, they said this would end impunity in Honduras. And in fact, bringing people to justice was a fairly easy demand to meet. It didn't take Honduras long, as you can imagine, to arrest 4 men for the murder. Other human rights advocates called for the need to expand the rights of association and assembly to allow for the kinds of advocacy that Berta was doing. But these human rights organizations, even those who wanted freedom of assembly, were wary of aligning themselves with her politics. Her efforts to protect not only the Lincoln Territory, but rivers throughout the country, with an awareness of how their diversion and contamination was evidence of what Rob Nixon has called slow violence. She condemned the coup, the neoliberal economic policies of the new regime, and she demanded the end of concessions for dams as well as mining and logging all throughout the country. And as a letter by her family explained following her death, quote, Berta's struggle was not only for the environment, it was for system change in opposition to capitalism, racism, and patriarchy. Now, as you may know, by almost any measure, Honduras is the most unequal country in Latin America and one of the most unequal in the world. If human rights law can only make space for activism like Berta's, or ensure that those who violate her rights to protest by killing her are punished, it will do little to address that inequality or change the power dynamics in which people like her operate. Business will continue as usual. It might be slowed for a time. In fact, the Dutch Development Corporation has now pulled out due to embarrassment, not embarrassment of the things that Berta was calling their attention to, but because she was killed. Human rights has always seen itself as being anti-political, or at least apolitical, so in many ways these responses are not surprising. But the immediate call for investigation, prosecution, and punishment that has become almost rote in the last 15 years takes us further away from the sources of harm, both local and global. And it allows the state to distance itself from its own roles by simply punishing a few bad actors, or those it claims are the bad actors. In the process, it feeds into increasing calls for more policing and incarceration throughout the world that, as I mentioned, human rights has long been critical of. Berta's advocacy is a lesson not only in the limit of human rights, but in some of its actual downsides. It's also a lesson, though, in how we might move forward. So I'll end this talk with the way her family ended their letter. Quote, as Berta said, and then they quote her, wake up, humanity, there's no more time. Our consciences are shaken by the mere thought of self-destruction by capitalist, racist, and patriarchal depredation, end quote. Responding to that call requires a different vision of human rights, and one that needs to be developed in conversation with people like those in many different fields in this room. Thank you.
Well, good morning. In the workshop, we have discussed this week European crisis. As you know, European crisis is a multidimensional crisis. It's economic, social, and political. In economics, the crisis demonstrate that this idea that Europe was optimum currency area was not good, was not okay. But we knew that. We thought that the process of integration itself will create optimality for a single currency based in the idea that a common vision, increasingly common vision about the future, the destiny, and about the way of solving problems and threats will create the condition for this optimality. But unfortunately, little have been seen of that. In economics terms, the EU has barely recovered the GDP before the crisis. Is now, at the end of the last year, the GDP was 0.3% above this of 2008, what is the same. And compared with the USA, with 10% more of GDP than in this year. So, and there are some countries like Spain, Portugal, Greece, Italy, Cyprus, and Finland under these pre-crisis levels. In employment, recovery has been even lower, although they are in the USA too. In social terms, the tendency to a more inequality distribution of income has accelerated, and significant opposition to immigration has surfaced, leading to regressive social movements contrary to the ideals of Europeans, like solidarity, integration, and freedom for the movement of people. In the political aspect, as you know, the ability of European authorities to tackle these problems, starting with the important one of the Greek crisis, has proved very limited. Germany has shown resistance to accept a supportive leadership, and at the other time fruitful Franco-German axis hasn't worked at all. So we have in something like orphan community governance at this moment, and asking for a new leadership that has to come from many countries that are not sharing the vision about the ends of Europe. It is this environment who made possible Brexit, and that make more weak or weaker the situation of the Italian banks. And to these two aspects shed more uncertainty and stop or slow the recovery of the European economy, until the point that the current forecast for the next year, and this year and the next year, about GDP is the endemic 1.5%. So we are stuck in that. The lack of clear solution to this problem and concern over minor issues like the fine to impose to Spain because its fiscal deficit threatened with make the problems deeper and to multiply its numbers. However, as I mentioned, there has been some progress in the construction of an optimal currency area, and particularly the building of a strong and very active European Central Bank. This has been a complete success, despite the German resistance. Is the Central European Bank, in fact, who saved the European Union of a major crisis. It is now urgent to move forward more integration with the European Banking Union, whose construction must be managed well, not injuring Italy, for example, and to a greater common budget that give more capacity to the European Commission to act and to intervene in solving the shocks, both symmetric and asymmetric economic shocks. We also need better and more transparent European governance with greater agreement between countries and probably differences in the level of integration, probably to speed, admitting that some countries want to go far in the integration than others. First of all, looking for a good agreement with the UK. This new framework will give greater security to the European population, now very frightened, and will increase integration, helping to assert the benefits of EU membership rather than highlight their weaknesses. Our main conclusion is the EU has to be an attractive project which more countries want to join and none of them want to leave. Yes, that's it all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you. Thanks all members of the panel. Thank also David for your introduction. And next I am introducing Salvador Medina. He's from the Santander group. So he's in some sense, well, the person we have to care, and thanks for all the help that you have given us. And now you have the floor, Salva. You have, what I want to say is that you have been, in many senses, so the person that has been solving all the difficulties of all kinds, so that we all can be here. So thank you very much, and please, it's your turn.
Thanks for your time. I'm not going to waste too much your time. I think that is a very long journey these days. And on behalf of Banco Santander, I only want to say that it's a privilege for us to be part of this event. We are here in this table, universities from different parts of the world, and share with you that Banco Santander, who is one of the biggest banks in the world, depending on the day, because you know that the stock market is... some days we are 10, other days we are 13, 14 or something like this. But something which is completely different is that we are the #1 in the world who invest more in higher education. We decided about 17 years ago, invest in higher education and support universities as the way to show to the society or compromise. And we have been dedicating around $1 billion for €1 billion to support higher education around the world. We have 1,200 agreements with universities around the world, and 3 of them are in this table. It's Harvard University, Universidad Complutense, and Northeastern University, by the way. And a lot of partnerships is in the room. It's strange because when you see this table and you see the rector of Universidad Complutense, David Kennedy from Harvard, Northeastern, and other colleagues, and one bank is like a joke. You know, what's one bank is doing this? But it's really a privilege because we are touching things we are very good for us. We are speaking about global issues. You are speaking about law, about human rights, about economy impact, about globalization. The world is global, and hearing you and analyzing and working with you in partnership with this workshop, it's unique for the bank. Really, we are a bank who has a motto, we want to help people and business progress. So if with this kind of event and supporting you, like an institution is part of our real vision, or how really we can help to the world to make these things. So I want to end my words telling again Carlos Andradas, the Rector of Universidad Complutense, thanks for giving us the opportunity to be here, and to David Kennedy that we met 6 years ago when Basu Kinesia was working with him in Brown University. And we begin to talk about the young faculty and how young faculty and how these kind of programs can really help to solve big problems. And after that, when we met at Harvard, we begin to develop the IGLP like a partner in this initiative. And today we are here in Spain with the workshop, with a satellite a workshop of the IGLP. So we are delighted to be here, and thanks for your time. And please think on Banco Santander like a good institution, not only a bad bank who make business and these things. And when you have a time with your friends or your parents or whatever, you speak about, I know one bank who makes the things in really different way. So with this, it's enough. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Salva. By now you know that I am Carlos Andradas, so the rector of the Universidad Complutense. So I just want to say, first of all, good morning to everybody, and to thank you to be here. So it's the first time that this workshop, the IGLP workshop, is held here in Madrid, in collaboration with the Universidad Complutense. And so the question that we were commenting with the organizers, so with David, with Rafa, with the ICIE, was, we wanted to have some event that took place at the university. So it's not that we are not happy with the facilities of the Santander. We know that they are magnificent, and of course we thank them. But we want also that you have somehow a touch of flavor of the Universidad Complutense. And then we thought of having a small session that they gave this name of Rector's Conference, although I am talking not very much. And when I thought where to have that, then I immediately thought of having it here, and I will explain you why in this room and in this building. So just to know that where you are, so we are in what we call paraninfo, so it's in the auditorium of the Facultad of Filología y Letras, so Philosophy and Letters of Universidad Complutense. And I want to thank the Dean of the Philology School that is here, so for being so generous and allowing us to be here. Of course, let me just say hello to the Dean of the Faculty of Economics also, and some other institutional persons of the Universidad Complutense that are around here. So I am a mathematician, so I'm learning to introduce myself, and that means that I'm not able to talk about, very, some issues. I was going to complicate issues. Well, mathematics is complicated as well, but I mean, some issues that you have been dealing with this week. So better than that, that they're in saying things that I don't know very much, I was thinking of, yes, sharing with you some thoughts, some reflections, and asking you some questions so that maybe we can even talk a little bit afterwards. You come from different countries. Most of you are scholars, different levels, different degrees in your careers. And that means that you know universities. And so the questions that I want to address, somehow they appear here. So David mentioned that. And essentially, one is, well, what is the role of universities in the 21st century that we are here? And the second one is, well, universities, we are a body also, and we act as a body and in this global frame that we are. And well, when one sees that, then we know that we behave also as many of the bodies of institutions that sometimes we criticize as well in this, say, global frame. Obviously, it's, well, frontiers have been erased, or at least dissolved. Research is done globally. Technology opens new possibilities for teaching and learning, say, not even, say, at having a physical presence. Languages are less and less a problem. Well, right now I am using English, which is not my mother language, as you can check easily. Students are no longer fixed, so they move, the same as researchers, as professors. And we have incorporated and accepted, or even promote sometimes, so rules of market, of global market in our universities. So we do marketing of our universities, we participate in fairs, we try to attract the best students all over the world, opening offices either in China or in Mexico or wherever. We have metrics to measure, say, our quality, or what is defined to be our quality, our level of research, which is done, say, by some indicators that we know that many times do not reflect essentially quality, but other things. But we more and more accept that and accept standards. And so we have this, in some sense, contradiction that we are obliged, and we study, say, the global frame and the global economy and the global law and these problems of globalization, that sometimes we forget that we ourselves are behaving in many times, or in many aspects, or in some aspects, in the way that we are also criticizing sometimes. So together with the question of what's the role of universities in this 21st century, I would also add, so how should universities behave as bodies ourselves, affected and measure and obliged to live in this global frame? How do we behave ourselves in this global frame? And this is not a matter, I think, or only a matter of being a public body, as we are, the Universidad Complutense, or a private one as Harvard. So our partner in this joint venture is. So let's stop here, so the questions mark, and now let's say, well, who are we? Yes, and I know that you, say, live here knowing a little bit of who are we, and we means Universidad Complutense. So just very briefly. The name of Universidad Complutense of Madrid has a contradiction in the name, because has two words that in some sense, well, they do not contradict, but they are not the same. Complutense is how do you call it? Gentilis? Is that word exists? So it's a word that makes the reference to a town, which I will reveal in a few seconds, is not Madrid. And that's why we say Complutense of Madrid. So we add Madrid, otherwise it would be redundant. Because, well, the Universidad Complutense was founded in 1499 in a nearby town. It's called Alcalá de Henares, which is 30 kilometers away from here, going east. And the name, that name has a Roman origin, and the Roman origin, or the Roman name of that town was Compluto. And there we say everything that has to do with Alcalá de Henares or with Compluto has the name of Complutense. That means from Compluto. So the university was founded there in 1499 by the Cardinal Cisneros. Cardinal Cisneros was the confessor of the Queen Isabel la Católica, and therefore was really a very powerful man. He was even the regent for a few years when, say, Isabel died and her daughter Juana also died. And he was the founder of the Universidad Complutense. And the Universidad Complutense was there in Complutum for many years till half of the 19th century, 1820 something, where it was moved. It moved to Madrid. Madrid had at that time was already the capital of the state, was an important town, and of course Alcalá is a minor town. So the university was moved to Madrid, and in fact lost the name because it was no longer in Compluto, and was called Universidad Central. Temporarily was called also for a few years Universidad Literaria, Literary University, till in 1970 we recover again the name of Complutense. Yes, say as recognizing that was the same university, so this more than 500-year old university that was the same, so it was Universidad Complutense, but now at Madrid, so in Madrid. So now you know why this contradiction in the name, and so a little bit of our history. Well, so you know who we are, at least who we were founded. And now where are we? So why are we in this building? And I want you to feel somehow inspired by this building, because it's a very inspiring room, this one. When moved to Madrid, the Universidad Complutense was not here, was in town, in fact in what we call now the Caserón de San Bernardo, the historical building that we want, and I say this loud, so just in case someone from the minister is hearing us, that we want to recover completely as soon as possible. And but soon, I mean, as the university was growing, that building was very short, yes, for to be the facilities, yes, to accommodate the whole university. So in 1927, on occasion of the 25th anniversary of the kingdom of Alfonso XIII, so our last, well, no, not the last, we are having a king now. So, well, a king, Alfonso XIII, then it was constituted what was called in May of 27 the Committee for the construction, for the building of the Ciudad Universitaria, which is how this is called. So the Cité Université, or the university. And in this big area that was, in fact, was a farm, was a land that belonged to the king. So it was belonged to the kingdom, and so it was donated, yes, to build a modern university to accommodate, say, what was becoming, say, and what wanted to be a big university in Spain, according to, say, the modern campus, mostly, say, inspired in the States, in the American campuses at that time. Then a bunch of young architects, so we started working, making projects and designing the buildings, and say with the premises or with the idea, the hypothesis of building a university that say had a unity in his conception, so that all areas were communicated, so that they were collaborate, they were learn from each other, that in say physically, spatially, and also academically. In a nice, say, surroundings, in a nice environment, nature environment, and also integrating residences and sports and other facilities. And that so was somehow the starting point of that. And some seat is missing. I hope not to miss everything. Then that was at the time of the king, Alfonso XIII, and now our history changed very rapidly. So in 31, there was no kingdom anymore, and then there was the Republic, the Second Republic in Spain, and it was really some years of flourishing in terms of intellectual activity, of culture. So a lot of initiatives were taken trying to situate Spain in Europe and in the world in what concerns culture and science. And so the project was really pushed forward, and in 1933, January 15th, this building was open. It was the first building of the Ciudad Universitaria, so of the new Universidad Complutense that was open. So you are really at the heart of the new Universidad Complutense, and that's why I wanted you to be here on this occasion. Was opened by the President of the Republic, that probably was seated here in the same place where we are more or less now. And then sequentially, say in those years, in around the 1935, say the Faculty of Medicine was built more or less at the same time in the 36, the science complex, which is on the other side of this, well, if you walk a little bit east from here, was built. And so was really a very exciting moment of development in Spain. Unfortunately, the same year, the 36, July 1836, there was the Franco's military coup against the Republic, and so the situation changed. That was in I said, July, and as soon as November of the same year, so in a very few months, so the rebels, they were trying to conquer Madrid, and in fact, they were stopped right here. So this Ciudad Universitaria, so just a few meters away from here, so the battlefront was established. And so there was this Ciudad Universitaria was really the front line of battle between the people that want to conquer Madrid and, say, the legal government that was trying to resist inside. And in fact, in this building, this precise building, there were the headquarters of the 11th International Brigade that was helping so to resist against the, say, rebellion. So again, this building has really a history and some, say, energy in well, say, fighting and conserving freedom in many senses. Well, the battle here, the front line, as I said, lasted till the March 29th of 1939. That was the date where Madrid surrendered, and was then the forces of the rebellion just entering Madrid, and in fact, the 1st of April, say the war was declared as finished. But you can understand so that then the Ciudad Universitaria, so all this environment, had a very symbolic meaning for everyone. So for people that were resisting, and also for people that were, say, conquering. And in fact, say, during the Franco's regime, the Ciudad Universitaria, so immediately, so as soon as in 1940, so just 1 year after, say, the war was finished, they again they rebuilt, or they refound the committee for the construction of the reconstruction of the Ciudad Universitaria. Fortunately, they respect in many sense the original project of the buildings, of the planification of the Ciudad Universitaria, although with different meaning. In fact, this was the place where many, say, military, processions were taking, demonstrations. Church also had a strong influence and had events here. But as I said, because of this symbolic meaning, so the reconstruction of the Ciudad Universitaria started fairly soon, and in fact, in October 12th, also a significant date in the Spanish, imaginary October. And if someone of you are from Latin America, you know that October 12th also is an important date. So this building was reopened in October 12th of 1943. Sorry, I didn't say that. And again, so this place, and I have seen some pictures, was the scenery of an event where on that occasion, in this same place, Franco, General Franco, was seated with a different, decoration, but essentially, so the same physical environment. So they were having also an event of reopening that building. 40% of the professors, they were fired. They had to go to fly away to exile, and new professors enter. That, as you can imagine, not always were recruited according to their intellectual excellence, but other merits also. They were important. Well, so you know where you are now. So that's why I wanted you to be here in this inspiring building. And since then, the Universidad Complutense has been really a symbolic place also in all the resistance and all the fights against the military dictatorship along these years. So a lot of demonstrations, students' demonstrations, acts in this room and other rooms at the university till, 75, where Franco died, and then our process of passing from that situation to democracy, started. Now, let me go back to the questions at the beginning. So, you know where we are, where we come from, and now the point is, there is no doubt that the Universidad Complutense has played a very important role in Spanish history in the 20th century. I explained you a little bit, just roughly, but if you just go to the website and look at the say, big names in the Spanish history that have been professors or have studied here is impressive. So the question that I was reflecting this morning was, you know that I was preparing this morning, sorry, was, well, what could we say in the global frame so that a university has been capital decisive, say, in the world for the 21st century, as we can say without any doubt that this university has been for the 20th century. So we are changing the scale. So we are now talking in a global frame, worldwide. So is there a single university that can say that has played? How do we have to move so that universities still play this relevant role and this relevant place? Or, well, maybe certainly we can say Google has played a significant role in the 21st century, or Apple, but we are talking about universities. So how can universities still play the role that, well, I wish that we continue to play? Well, there are some obvious answers, and obvious answers as, well, we are important. I know that we are important, and in fact, if you see, and let me just say this very small parenthesis, so repression goes very, very often to universities, and as you see what has been happening in Turkey now, well, you see that a lot of people from universities has been also, yes, taken. So and that means that universities still are, say, dangerous for some things, or at least are important. So we have to be really concerned, and we have to be sure that we are important. But we have to think on how we play our role so that this importance is really, is realized in some sense. Well, why are we important? Some obvious answers. Of course, we educate people, we educate citizens, and I think that, of course, ethics, values are more and more important in a global frame, as we have listened and heard before. We create knowledge, so we do research, but even in that we have threats. So I don't know if that happens in your country, but here in Spain, certainly there are some movements that try to move slightly away, say, research from universities, so taking to very specialized institutes that somehow are isolated. They even physically, they are not located at the same universities, so that the contact is not at least as good as it could be. As I said before, research is moved very often, and we are moving, say, and I said accepting and somehow even promoting that research is moved by very, say, concrete incentives. So that means the rate of publications, the publishing policies of companies are taking more and more power. They are becoming, say, monopoles in the sense that, well, they impose conditions, and since our career depends on that, so we are accepting these conditions. But besides these obvious questions, or obvious answers that we educate people, that we do research, so what can we do? Can we do more on that, say, inside what we call our social responsibility? Can we do more besides, of course, trying to understand and and research and study. So these global problems that you have been studying this week. So inequality that has been increasing and in fact as a consequence of this crisis that already lasts for almost 10 years. And we see how here in Spain, so more and more people has become more and more poorer, and a very few people has become more and more rich. This mobility, this movement of persons, so what we are suffering or at least seen here in Europe, so the refugees, and how poor the answer is being, and how poor in many senses the answer that we, the universities, have given to this problem is being. The poverty, the planet sustainability, and you were mentioned also a dramatic example. The violence that takes different roles, but is continuing. This cry that was mentioned before, that wake up, that we should wake up. I think that we should make it also institutionally to the universities. So universities should try to wake up. Maybe we don't know how to behave, but we have to wake up. And if, say, if the world is walking toward what is called the economy 4.0, I think that we should try at least to work towards the university 3.0. Well, these are the questions that I try to pose myself as a rector when, say, all this, the daily commitments allow. And those are the questions that I really wanted to address to you, and also, if we have time, and we don't know whether we have time, well, maybe we have 5 or 10 minutes time, that I would like also to listen to your opinions and to your suggestions. Anyway, yes, before we open maybe a little dialogue, I want to thank you for being here. It has been really for us a pleasure and an honor to host this workshop of the IGLP. I want to thank everyone that has worked, that has made this possible, starting from the Santander, Salvador, thanks. We hope that this is the beginning of a long series that allows us to meet in the time coming. To the IGLP, David, and to the people in the office that has made this possible, to the ICIE and Rafa, Isabel, and also the staff that has worked on that, and all of you that are becoming here, that are really the stars of this film that we are doing all together. So thanks, and if any one of you guys want to make a comment, you are, of course, absolutely welcome to do that.
Good morning. Thanks to the organizers of this session for their work, and congratulations because it means one more step in the important relations between Harvard and Complutense University. Following the example of our rector, I try to briefly introduce myself. I'm an economist. I'm terribly sorry, nobody's perfect. I belong to the School of Economics and to the Complutense Institute for International Studies too. And my question is to my colleague, Rafa Miro. But don't worry, I'm not asking you about the European Central Bank and the, in my opinion, wrong answer of the European Union to the economic, social, political, and institutional crisis. I'm wondering about the future, and I recognize that it's much more difficult to answer something about the future. In particular, I want to ask you about the transatlantic trade and investment partnership. Do you consider it as a way to improve or reinforce relationship between the US and Europe? Or on the contrary, do you find this new kind of bilateral agreement as a way to something negative or something that could create problems for the better global governance promoted by the already existing multilateral institutions as the International Monetary Fund, the OECD, and in particular the World Trade Organization? Thank you.
Well, we discussed this problem in some sessions of the workshop. My personal opinion is that the TTIP is has to be reformulated in order to capture the advantages of more freedom in trade and foreign investment that can help some countries and eliminate the disadvantage of escape of the the law that is implicit in the reformulation of the law, the international laws that are implicit in these treaties that is planning some escape from the national jurisdictions. But I think in this war, as we face a global crisis, for me it's clear that we need more a global governance. And a global governance has to be made with more treaties and more coordination of policies, and more international institutions, not with less. No? So the problem is to avoid things that escape from the normal democratic controls of the countries. No? And these treaties particularly has two problems. One is the arbitrage about foreign investment, and the other, even more important, is the regulation made outside of every country, no? With a special committees to regulate sector and activities. And for me, this is a very big matter of worry. No?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mimi Zhou. I'm assistant professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong and a participant of this workshop. I'd like to thank the Rector for having us in this very inspiring and elegant lecture hall. And of course, Santander. Always have to thank the sponsor, and I'll be pleased to say that I'm going to sign up for a bank account once I get back to my country. So thank you very much, and I think Santander's sort of investment in higher education generally is something that really stands out. And this question, I return to the question that the Rector posed about the role of universities in the 21st century. Now, all of us have come as young scholars because we are passionate about our research and scholarship. And look, we want to change the world. When I started this job in Hong Kong 2 years ago, my first lecture. It was the size of this lecture hall, but there were no students. They had gone out to the streets of Hong Kong to protest. And it made me think, the last 2 years, as I grapple with the politics and the politicization of universities in my jurisdiction, I keep thinking, what about the students? And I know this is something that hasn't been really addressed in this panel, but you did mention our role as educators. I do believe that is a very, very important role. And I just wanted to really reiterate your comments about the importance of values and instilling the right sort of values in our students. People might disagree with me, this approach to education, legal education, as we've seen in recent times. But I just really wanted to thank you for that comment, which I really picked up.
Thank you. We have time for one more, because we have been so accurate with the time that we have, yes. And if not, I just recommend you, when you walk out, yes, to see these glasses that we have in the hall of the building. They are, well, not the original, because the original were destroyed during the war, but they are exactly in the same design that we have rebuilt that according to the original design. And if you have time to walk a little bit around the campus, just do it, even if it's a little bit warm. But well, it's July and it's Madrid. Sorry, I can't change that. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you here in the future, maybe in the workshop or as just visiting us when you want. Thank you very much.